In my lifetime, I have lived at 17 different addresses. A number that sounds so improbable to me that I have to recalculate it every time I think about it. I have to write them all down. 17 addresses across 9 towns, 7 states. 17 different places that I have come home to in 53 years. I did the average. It's an average of moving every 3 years, which feels weird. I didn't feel like I did that often. I guess that makes me a wanderer. Maybe not so much as others. I know others who probably can state more than 17 addresses, and certainly more than some. So I think I'm sort of a mid-grade nomad. I once lived next to a man who had been born in the very house he was living in when I met him. And save for maybe a few years of college and I think a very brief stint in the Army, he had lived there his entire life. He was 72 when I met him. And when I moved away, he was still there, 80 years old. His rootedness in that place astonished me, because of course I'm a wanderer. I don't root as well, I guess. And I remember there was a buckeye tree. You all familiar with buckeye trees? The little nut. There's a buckeye tree on the driveway that we shared. And my children one fall, were gathering the buckeyes together, and the gentleman had come out, and he and I were talking, and he was reminiscing that he used to do the same thing when he was their age, 8, 9 years old. And he said he'd gather them up, and he had a little hand drill, and they would drill holes through them and string them into a necklace. I don't remember all the trees at all the places I've called home. There's this deep yearning for home that I sense in people, I hear in our conversations. But too, as I listen to that yearning, I am bewildered by the ambiguity of this thing that we call home. We talk about it. We talk about home like we have a common understanding amongst all of us about what that is. But any sense of common understanding falls apart under even the slightest scrutiny. I did one of those Google searches where you just type home is and see what it starts suggesting. And the algorithm resulted in mostly sentimental and banal assortment of cliches. Home is where the heart is. Home is where you hang your hat. Home is where you are. Home is where, when you go there, they have to take you in. Home is wherever I'm with you. And home is where the eggs are. Which turns out to be a cookbook. I had never heard that one, but it's apparently a cookbook. Home is where, okay. And, they're lovely sentiments, and perhaps apply, in some cases, to your sense of home. But I don't think they're universal. Not all of us eat eggs. So there you go. For me, to privilege one notion of home over another is to deny the heart experience of another person, right? Or even your own. Is home a place? Is home one of those 17 places I've lived? Is it a building? Is home where the family is? Maybe home is just a relationship, a sense of belonging. So I find, while the idea of what is home is contingent and variable. I think the yearning for home is a universal hunger. Perhaps because so many of us at one time or another have been in exile. I recently read Toni Morrison's novel, Tar Baby. And if you haven't had a chance to read Tar Baby, Toni Morrison is just an astounding writer. There were parts of that novel where I physically were making movements with my arms to try and understand what was being said. And very few authors can make me physically move while I'm reading. Anyway, the story in Tar Baby involves an American millionaire who has retired to a private island in the Caribbean. His name is Valoran. He is joined by his young trophy wife, Margaret, his family's faithful servants, Sydney and Ondine, and their Sorbonne-educated niece, Jadine, and a mysterious castaway known as Sun. They are all of them, exiles from home, all for different reasons, all having made different choices. And the island that they reside on is haunted by the ghosts of African slaves who the legend was when they first set sight on the island after having been stolen from their countries, they went blind. And they now roam the countryside riding horses, blind. Exiles. And Morrison, in this novel, probes both the sense of exile and the yearning for home. And in the beautiful way she has in her writing, offers us only ambiguous resolutions. One of the things I love about Toni Morrison's writing, she doesn't give us answers, but she makes you think. In the novel, Jade and Sun fall in love of a sort. And they try to return to that which they think of as home. But for Jade, that is New York City. And in New York City, Sun is just another exile. So then they try his hometown, a tiny, poor, mostly black village of Elo, Florida, in which Jade is the exile and is lost. And so we find that we are exiles, and as exiles, we are always yearning to come home. I think perhaps one of the possible commonalities that we share for the idea of home is that home represents a kind of stability. We're out in the world, and this place, this idea that we call home, feels stable. But that's not to say that all our experiences of home, even remotely, were stable. But I think our idea or our ideal of home carries perhaps maybe it's just the hope of stability, and with that, some sense of peace. Side note, this is an odd thing, but I threw this in anyway. About 30 years ago, there were some researchers who were trying to bring the ideas of design and architecture to elementary school students. And I loved this research project. In one project, they asked kindergarten through second graders to draw a picture of a home. And the vast majority of kids at that age produced the image that you might expect, the sort of iconography of house, right? So the sort of square house with the gable roof, chimney, door, window, tree. Almost universally, they all created that. What was fascinating to the researchers, particularly, and to me, where they were working mostly in densely urban neighborhoods, where nobody lived in a house like that. Most of these kids had spent their entire lives living in mid-rise or high-rise apartment buildings, maybe, if they were fortunate enough, in one of these little skinny townhomes that are all welded next to each other down the block. Now, no one claims that they weren't aware of what their home looked like. Of course they knew what they looked like. But I found the sense of stability and peace that that iconographic house represented to be compelling. Some of those kids might have been yearning for that particular kind of home because they saw it as stable. Or perhaps they just simply hungered for that ambiguous sense of peace or stability, or perhaps that represents this ineffable idea of home. Okay, so here we are. I have 17 home addresses, a memory of a Buckeye necklace, some sentimental cliches, Toni Morrison's Exiles, and a bunch of first graders' drawings, and there's still no concrete sense of what we mean by home other than a common sense of yearning for it. And I paused to wonder whose idea was this sermon anyway. I think about America a lot. This country. Particularly since 2016. More perhaps than I used to. And I find that to be one of the odd privileges of America. One of those odd privileges that you could exist here without having to think about it too much. But I don't think that's true anymore. At least it isn't for me. And maybe for many, many people here, it never's been true. I have grieved for the America I thought I understood and knew. I have hoped for a return to that America. You know, the America I didn't have to think about. That pre-2016 America. Or perhaps, truly, I might even hope for something even better. And dear friends, I don't think I'm alone in that yearning. I hear that yearning from both the political left and the political right. And all the points in between. The thing is, friends, we're not all yearning for the same thing. It's kind of like that yearning for home, right? It all means something different. Some of us are yearning for those 17 home addresses, and some of us are yearning for the Buckeye tree, and some of us for Elo, Florida, and some of us for New York City. And some of us yearn for the gabled roof and chimney, and others simply a place where they are at last welcomed as they are. And we are all of us, exiled from that idea which we thought of, which we imagined, the idea of the values and truths that those ideas of home represented, those ideas of America represented. We yearn for that home, that idea, that place, that sense of belonging that has never quite been home enough. That sense of belonging that has never quite been home enough. In our story this morning, the blue songbird, it actually, I don't know if you've noticed this, it follows this well-known pattern that Joseph Campbell talked about as the monomyth, or the hero's journey. You may have heard about that. Frangolino has spoken about this recently very well. And in the cycle, in the monomyth cycle, the journey always begins, the journey from home always begins with a calling to adventure away from home. In our story, it's the mother saying, you have to go find your song. And the cycle, in the Joseph Campbell cycle, he talks about the challenges and trials along the way, as well as mentors and helpers. And our little bird, of course, struggles on the journey, losing faith and hope in finding what she seeks, and eventually finding help, a mentor, the crow. And the completion of the journey is always home. It's always illustrated as a circle coming down to the abyss and the transformation and the return home. And our little bird does find herself home again, but feels in this intense failure that she's failed her task. That is, until she opens her little beak to tell her story and finds the thing she yearned for was within her all the time. I say that she returned home. The story says that she returned home, but she didn't really. And here's the key. She didn't return to the home that she remembered, not to the home she knew, not to the home she imagined she understood. The home she returned to was something both familiar and new, familiar and strange, because home had changed. She had changed. She had changed. So friends, I believe we are all, each in our own way, on this journey, traveling home, trying to get home. Maybe we have just set out on the journey and the sense of home is far away. Others are just now arriving at the threshold and have their hand on the doorknob. And we know that the coming home is so complicated. Thanksgiving's this week. And many of us know the coming home can be pretty complicated. Because the home we return to is never the same as the one we all knew. Because we have changed in our leaving, in our return. We have changed in our exile and our return. We have changed in our hero's journey and returned. So if we're all on our way home, but on different parts of that journey, and we feel our exile, and we are all yearning for a different idea of home, no wonder this country is so lost, so broken, so afraid of itself. The only thing we seem to share is this yearning for the thing we thought we had. I believe in America. Not the America that is, and certainly not the one that has been. I believe in the America becoming. The America where a wanderer such as I can find a home under 17 different roofs, or an America where my rooted neighbor can gather buckeyes under the same tree for his entire life. An America where home might be found in New York City or in Elo, Florida. I believe in an America whose people know themselves to be not on a journey to an imagined past, but on a transformational journey toward the home they have not yet imagined. The Reverend Victoria Safford wrote a piece in The Nation, it was years ago, called The Gates of Hope. And in that piece, I read something of a pause, an invitation to pause in our yearning for this thing we call home. In her words, there is a moment in our journey to stop. At a different, sometimes lonely place. A place of truth-telling about your own soul first and its condition. The place of resistance and defiance from which you see the world, both as it is, as it could be, as it will be. The place from which you glimpse not only the struggle, but the joy in the struggle, and we all can stand there, beckoning and calling, telling people what we're seeing, and asking them what they see. And friends, I think this is our way home. Together. Pausing just long enough on our journey and telling each other what we see and asking what others see, allowing ourselves to be changed in the stories we tell and the stories we are told. Allowing ourselves at long last to come home, and in the coming, find at last our one true song. Amen, my friends. And I love you. And may we live in blessing.